very thankful for you for coming today in such weather and hard traffic. And I would like you to introduce to my thinking and about my approach, because from the Petlura started my interest in Ukrainian Jewish relations. And when I realized what has been done to his image, to his personality, I started to learn more and start to deep dive into Jewish-Ukrainian relations. And I will start from the William Shakespeare. "'Tis better to be vile than while esteemed." It's exactly words from the sonnet number 121. It's exactly matching what has been done to Petlura. Okay, in order to gain a correct and complete understanding of the situation in Ukraine between 1917 and 1921, it should be noted that the Russian Empire pursued a centuries-old policy of systematic state anti-Semitism. The Jewish population of the empire were subject to oppression, humiliation, and violence, including forced conscriptions into the army and the introduction of the Pale of Settlement, along with multiple pogroms, of course. This situation worsened after the collapse of the Russian Empire in 1917 and following the fall of the Russian, let's say, Confederation state. Ukrainians in the Russian Empire were also second-class citizens. A very telling publication appeared in March 1914 in the Kiev-based Russian language newspaper, newspaper of the Black Hundreds, called "The Double-Headed Eagle." So I quote it. "It has been nearly 2 weeks since the traitorous demonstration of the Judeo-Mazepinists, yet Russian people still cannot calm down. They remain agitated, and rightly so. Long before the so-called Shevchenko Jubilee, Russian patriotic unions warned the government about the true meaning and purpose of this Shevchenko Jubilee and the demonstrations associated with it. The higher administration of the region categorically forbade Mazepinite demonstrations and the glorification of Judeo-Masonic ideas dedicated to the person of the so-called great poet, thereby preventing many vile and grievous events." End of quote. So the general, whether Tsarist, white or red, or modern Putin's Russian Empire, it has been always adhered to the ancient principle of divide and conquer, deliberately inflaming discord among the subjugated people. After the collapse of the Russian Empire, interventions and the Red Terror and brutal Bolshevik repressions began as early as 1970. They were directed against all people who sought to win national independence from the Moscow Empire. The communists paid special attention to the destroying national cultures, traditions, and religious denominations. Red Moscow vigorously imposed the Russian language on the occupied territories, erected its own markers and monuments, and replaced God with the living. The Civil War, 1917-1921, and the anarchy it unleashed became another source of violence against the Jewish population. Proclaimed on the territory of Ukraine the People's Republic, UNR or UPR, treated the Jewish population favorably as representatives of one of the most oppressed peoples in the Russian Empire. Therefore, a Ministry of Jewish Affairs was established in the UNR and operated actively there. The text of the Third Universal, this is the legislative act of the Republic, was published in 4 languages, as you can see: Ukrainian, Russian, Polish, Yiddish. And also in Yiddish has been inscripted UNR banknotes, 100 karbovanets, 100 karbovanців, and in Yiddish underneath. It was called Jewish money, or the eggs, because of the color. The head of Ukrainian Public Republic is Simon Petlura, and before that he was the organizer of the Ukrainian armed force, and he always was sincerely interested in the Jewish question. Even in school, as his classmates recalled, he often took the side of Jewish students who were being insulted by quarrelsome peers. For this, he was mockingly called the Jews' daddy. In parallel with Petlura, who had held philo-Semitic views since his youth, the Ukrainian People's Republic also had a deputy minister of foreign affairs and previously a member of the Supreme High Court of the Republic, a Ukrainophile named Arnold Margolin, a lawyer, public figure, and political activist. And the book in Russian, because it was his first language, and I wrote the quote that you will understand why. The native language of my childhood was Russian. And although in our home people often spoke Yiddish, everyone always addressed me in Russian. I was accustomed to thinking and speaking in Russian. The Russian language connected me with Russian culture. The very word Ukraine in the environment in which I lived was then an empty cell. There was only a notion of chochli, a derogatory term of Ukrainians. But even that was vague. It was associated with the living image of servants, peasant women who brought milk, vegetables, and so on. Yet since time immemorial, I had felt a deep attachment to my native city of Kiev and to the Dnipro River, and later to the Ukrainian countryside with its yellow fields, thatched roof, and cherry trees. Already in my gymnasium years, I preferred life in the village to any tempting trips abroad. These lines referring to the late 19th century, but it fully resonates with the situation in eastern Ukraine of Soviet Union of the 1960s, 1980s, and with my own impressions. The same Russification, the same alienation from Ukraine, the same Kiev, Kharkiv, Dnipro, and the same underlying love for the Ukrainian landscape and culture. But let us turn to the language of the documents in order to understand the true attitude of Simon Petlura toward the Jewish population of Ukraine, as well as the attitude of Ukrainian Jews toward the Ukrainian People's Republic and its head. From the very beginning in his activity as the Ukrainian People's Republic, serving as the Secretary General of Military Affairs, Petlura made an appeal to Ukrainian soldiers back on November 15, 1970. Do not allow pogroms and riots, and if you allow them, you will be a disgrace to the glorious name of the Ukrainian army. No pogroms should be allowed on our land. Petlura continually carried out anti-pogrom measures. Several documents attest to these actions by Petlura. For example, telegram dated January 28, 1919. The Minister of Jewish Affairs reports robberies and excesses against the Jewish population at Yaresky station by passing echelons. I order an investigation of the matter and a report to me, and I also order measures to ensure that such excesses do not occur in the future and are prosecuted criminally. Supreme Ataman Petlura. Another telegram from Supreme Ataman Petlura dated June 8, 1919. To all, death to the pogromists. There is a report that in Volochisk, after the entry of our army, unknown workers who incited our Cossacks to a Jewish pogrom were arrested by the Cossacks themselves. If this is true, I order such provocateurs to be shot immediately with public notice. In future, similar cases, I demand firmness and decisive punishment of such provocateurs according to the law of wartime. The following documents is fairly well known because a number of its original copies have survived in the archives. The title is Bulletin of the UNAIR Minister of Information, dated July 1919. The Supreme Ataman affirms that the Jews have made no small human sacrifice for the building of the Ukrainian Independent Republic. The Supreme Ataman knows of instances when members of the Jewish population aided our army, loyally supported the lawful Republican authorities, while the enemies of our state, the communists and Bolsheviks, executed, raped women and children, carried out pogroms against the Jewish population, and seized their last material means of subsistence. The Supreme Ataman regards with a great respect this sacrifice of the Jewish population has made on the altar of our homeland. The Supreme Ataman knows of facts when the Jewish population helped our sick and wounded, and Jewish children washed the blood from the bodies of our heroes in hospitals, quickly organized by the Jews themselves. The Supreme Ataman was moved by the tears of gratitude shown by our sick and wounded Cossacks toward the Jews for their heartfelt care and assistance to their neighbors. The Supreme Ataman observed with pleasure how the Cossacks of our army stood guard at Jewish shops and warehouses, protecting their property from looting. The Supreme Ataman firmly hopes that such facts will become more frequent and will be of much benefit in calming our country. The Supreme Ataman reports that pogrom agitation is often deliberately carried out by Bolshevik provocateurs in the rear of our army lines, with the aim of disorganizing our front and all the state-building work of our government. Periodically, Petlura met Jewish communities in Ukraine. One of them was the meeting of Jewish activists with the head of the directory, Petlura, in city of Kamenets. It was July 17, 1919. The original report, 10 pages, was written in Yiddish and translated into Ukrainian. I cite only a few, but very important paragraphs from this huge document. Mr. Ataman declares that anti-Jewish excesses results from provocation and the irritation it causes. He will fight these provocations mercilessly, both politically and militarily. The Cossacks who steal and rob became mere criminals. The Cossacks understand this and are taking measures against it themselves. He will demand that the inspectorate and military authorities take the most decisive measures in the fight against pogroms. He will influence the insurgents to live in complete harmony with the Jewish population. He will not allow Cossack attacks on the Jews. We must fight the Bolsheviks. But in addition to fighting the Bolsheviks, Ukraine is fighting for its independence. Jews have always supported Ukrainian independence. He asked to continue supporting him. Rabbi Gutman was the first to speak in Hebrew. He says, religious custom requires that when they see the head of a people, they say a prayer. Blessed is he who has separated honor from men. During Tsarist times, this was not possible, and he could not offer such a prayer to the authorities, who had defiled any sense of divinity by committing pogroms. Nor could he address the Bolshevik authorities, because they had done the same. He now says the prayer with a light heart, because the composition of the government of Ukraine is intended to be democratic, under which the Jewish people will live freely. The best proof of this, he said, is that Ukraine is the first country to have a Jewish minister. From the perspective of the Torah, Bolshevism was a kind of Babylonian pandemonium, whose generation was punished by the Great Flood. Moreover, Bolshevism seeking to undermine the foundations of religious Judaism could not win the sympathy of the religious community. Now, before praying, he swears on behalf of all the Jewish sanctuaries that there is no place for Bolshevism among the faithful. Trusting in God's power, he believes that Ukraine will become an independent country. He asked the Ottoman, in the name of the Holy God, that there will be no set days for Jews in places where the Ukrainian army enters. Rising with the whole delegation and the Supreme Ottoman, he says the prayer, blessed is he who has separated honor from men. The rabbi wore a kippah through the prayer. Responding to the Jewish question, the Supreme Ottoman promised to use all the power at his disposal to eliminate actions against the Jews that hindered the work of the state. The Ottoman will resolutely fight criminality. He asked the mass press to report on an active support of the Jewish population so that together we can create favorable conditions to peaceful coexistence between fraternal peoples and help Ukraine recover. Regarding Jewish participation in the army, Jewish delegation asked Petlura to mobilize Jewish Cossacks into the army. Maybe we can show. This is the document, the first page and the last page from the archives. One of the orders of Supreme Ottoman Petlura dated August 26, 1919. Our history was destined by our glorious Cossacks, who bring freedom and happiness to our native land, and to all those who have settled here peacefully since ancient times. Dark elements, the Black Hundreds and the Red Hundreds, one dark group, and various provocators dropped their weapons, crawled out of their holes and nooks, and began their shameful work on another ground. They are jealously waving their shameful web of provocation, inciting pogroms against the Jewish nation, and sometimes driving some terrible elements to our army to commit these dreadful deeds. They want to tarnish our struggle for freedom before the whole honest world and to ruin our national cause. It is time for us to understand that the Jews, like the majority of our Ukrainian population, have suffered from the Bolshevik communist invasion. The truth is clear. It's time to understand that the peaceful Jewish population, their children, and their women, as well as we, have been enslaved and deprived of their national will. They cannot leave us. They have lived with us since time immemorial, sharing our destiny and our misery. The knightly army, which brings brotherhood, equality, and freedom to all the people of Ukraine, should not listen calmly to all sorts of rascals and provocateurs who crave human flesh. Whoever commits such a grave crime is a traitor and an enemy of our land and must be excluded from human coexistence. The whole world is watching and is marveling at our deeds of liberation. Do not tarnish them, even accidentally, with a shameful act. Do not bring burning shame upon our country. Our many external and internal enemies are already exploiting these devastating events. They are pointing fingers to us and harassing us as we were unworthy of independent statehood and must be subjugated again. I, your Supreme Ottoman, tell you that right now this matter is being decided in international court to be or not to be an independent state. Take up our arms against the real enemy and remember that our holy mission requires clean hands. Rest assured that all enemies of the nation will face severe legal punishment in the People Courts. I strongly order that all those who incite pogroms be expelled from our army and brought to justice as traitors of the fatherland. The UNR government, realizing all the damage the pogroms have done to the state, issued an appeal to the entire nation, calling on everyone to oppose all measures of the enemies, including pogroms against the Jewish population. Another document that provides valuable insight into Petlura's attitude toward Jews is a receipt from the Ministry of Jewish Affairs, Pinchas Krasny, which records a monetary donation from the head of the Ukrainian People's Republic to assist Jewish refugees. I emphasize, this donation came and made from Petlura personal funds to help Jewish refugees, Jewish citizens of the Ukrainian People's Republic who share the same faith as the Ukrainian people. The document is titled Receipt of the Minister of Jewish Affairs of the Ukrainian People's Republic, and it states, on February 18, 1921, 15,000 Polish marks donated by Mr. Chairman of the Directory to the Committee for the Aid of Jewish Refugees, citizens of UNR, were received. Minister of Jewish Affairs, Krasny. The appeal to the people of Ukraine, actually this document, was signed by Simon Petlura as Supreme Ottoman of UNR on March 18, 1921. And it states, look around you, examine closely, and you will see that the Jewish population, small shopkeepers, artisans, and workers who, like all laborers, earn their piece of bread by their work, are likewise oppressed and robbed by the Bolshevik regime. Goods from merchants, shops, tools, and machines from the artisans are seized for the commune. And is that not ruin for the Jewish population? Can a Jewish population dying of hunger and be satisfied with the Bolsheviks? If you meet Jews among the communists, remember that they are traitors to their own people, Cain-like having forgotten of the faith and the laws of their fathers, just as those of our traitors who joined the communists are traitors. And it would be unjust to load the blame for them on the entire Jewish people, just as it is impossible to lay the blame for our traitors on the whole Ukrainian people. I know that honest Jewish society has disowned these traitors and has branded them with the plundered gold of other Bolsheviks, having sent their agent to all countries, founded newspapers in every language that slanders our holy cause, the liberation movement of our people. Portray it as banditry and pogrom-making people. Workers and peasants in some countries who have not seen the Bolsheviks with their own eyes consider them lovers of the people, believe their slanders against the Ukrainian insurgents. The heartfelt welcome that Jewish population gave them when our army returned to its native territory last year, the tears with which the Jewish population saw our retreating army off, the terror that gripped the Jewish population at the Bolshevik raids, the tens of thousands of Jews who followed our army fleeing the Bolsheviks, and who here share our faith and dream of our dreams. All this convinced world that the bandits are not us, but the Bolsheviks. As the chief Ottoman of the Ukrainian army, I order you, punish mercilessly the Bolsheviks, communists, and other bandits who commit Jewish pogroms and annihilate the population, and as one stand in defense of the poor and exhausted people. Even after defeat of the Ukrainian People Republic by Red Moscow, Petlura continued to be perceptive statesman, free from any bias and anti-Semitism, of course. As confirmation, these documents that I will be cited. First, it's dated January 4th, 1922. Mr. General, in your letter of December 25, 1921, you raised the question of conferring the rank of administrative officers upon certain individuals, Jewish pharmacists. As you will see from my resolution on this document, I find no objection to a positive decision on this matter. According to our laws, we have no right to impose any restrictions on Jews, of course, provided they meet the same general requirements applied to officers of our army of other nationalities and faith. In the future, the percentage of non-Orthodox elements in our army will increase, and the interest of state policy require a certain from the national points of view adaptation of those elements. Otherwise, we will face unnecessary opposition in additional destructive force that will weaken our statehood. In this matter, religious affiliation must be subordinated to state allegiance, following the example of the French army, where the nationality of faith of Jewish officers and soldiers has never prevented them from being good French patriots. By such a policy, we will win over our Jewish elements far more effectively than by policy of restrictions or persecution. For the first, we will make of us Ukrainians of the Moses law, while the latter will create enemies of our statehood, who will undermine it from within. Our government must have a clear and far-sighted state policy in this, at times irritating matter. In the Ukrainian Galician army, as you know, this issue was resolved positively. Likewise, in our siege corps, where there were Jewish officers and good ones, as I know from personal experience. And one of the most revealing documents reflecting Simon Petlura's attitude toward Jews and Jewish independence is his letter to the Minister of the Jewish Affairs, Pinchas Krasny, dated July 30, 1922. Mr. Minister, in connection with the acceptance of the mandate over Palestine by the British government, I consider it my duty to convey to you, as the representative of the Jewish population of Ukraine in the government of the Ukrainian People's Republic, my greetings on the occasion of such an important historical act. Perhaps this act does not yet signify the completion of the Jewish people's struggle for the creation of their independent own statehood, but it undoubtedly marks an important political and, above all, a real stage in its realization. I believe that the Jewish population of Ukraine, together with the government of our republic, would greet this event with a great joy. The centuries-old territorial dispersion of the Jewish people has now come to an end, and they have their own territorial heart, their own territorial base, where through organized efforts, they can freely gather and solidify their statehood. The mandate over Palestine accepted by the British government, as you already know, has all been recognized by the Council of the League of Nations. This given even greater significance to this international act. We sincerely respect Petlura. In addition to the well-known tours of the choir conducted by Alexander Koshets, initiated, by the way, by Simon Petlura, there exists another documentary proof of the statesman-like thinking of the chairman of the Directorate of the UNRWA. This letter dated December 19, 1921. Honorable Mr. Chairman, the matter of exceptional importance to you, which you, Mr. Chairman, devoted your letter, received on the 12th of this month, has been carefully considered by me over the past week in several confidential meetings with the relevant responsible Jewish representatives in order to find the best ways to bring it into effect. The consideration expressed by you, Mr. Chairman, regarding the necessity of creating special literature that would clarify and deepen public understanding of Ukrainian Jewish relations are fully shared by the Ministry of Jewish Affairs. The subject of all these literary works concern the Ukrainian liberation movement and the Jewish-Ukrainian relations in connection with this movement. Thus, in addition to the book by Mr. Goldelman, mentioned by you, Mr. Chairman, and the forthcoming publication by Mr. Margolin, a book by Mr. Humener, who was recently appeared, written in popular style in the Yiddish language, it provides the overview of the events of Ukraine in general and in Podolia in particular during the years 1919 and 1920. The Ministry also fully shares your opinion, Mr. Chairman, on the necessity of engaging appropriate literary figures in this endeavor. In this respect, both the Ministry and certain public organizations have already taken specific steps. As far as possible, this work will continue to be carried out in the future. I will tell a bit more details about Arnold Margolin's book. It's called Ukraine and the Policy of the Intent, Notes of Jew and a Citizen. It was written in 1920, 1921, and first published back 1922. It's important to note that its author was a Russian-speaking Jew, and not just a Jew, but a defender of the Jewish population of Ukraine that had been suffered from the imperial pogroms. For defending Menachem Beilis from the Russian Empire authorities and had accused of the ritual murders of the Christian child. Margolin, for this work, was expelled from the Bar Association of the Russian Empire. Thus, it's impossible to accuse Margolin of any kind of anti-Semitism or of sympathizing with pogromists. Zionist Arnold Margolin supported Ukraine's aspiration for independence and used his knowledge and experience for the sake of this noble goal. It's remarkable that after receiving a position in the Supreme Court of the Ukrainian People's Republic, Margolin had to learn the Ukrainian language at the age of 40, despite being born and raised in the Ukrainian city of Kyiv. The book, Ukraine and the Policy of the Intent, was written by a direct witness of events in the Russian Empire during the Revolution 1905, 1917, and the Ukrainian struggle for the liberation from 1917 to 1921. With the great conquest and deaths, Arnold Margolin describes in his book Simon Petlura, whom he met personally, and very importantly, the anti-pogrom actions of the UNRWA leader. Petlura spoke to me frankly about the hopeless situation in which the army then found itself. With a disarming sincerity, he castigated both himself and others for the whole series of the past mistakes. There was no demagoguery, no posturing, only common sense and boundless love for his people shone through everything he said to me. Then he began asking me about my impressions abroad. From the very nature of his questions, I saw that this man already understood Western European politics excellently and had moved far away from the utopianism of Russian socialist thought in which he had essentially been educated. During the 3 days we spent in Tarnov, I met with Petlura 3 times. His statesman-like views, his boundless love for Ukraine, his ability to orient himself, and his clear knowledge of everything that was happening abroad revealed themselves even more vividly than during our meeting in Kamenets-Podilsky. All the suffering that had befallen this man, all the accusation and his awareness of the immense responsibility had tempered him. He continued to remain steadfast in his post. Arnold Margolin also formulated in his book an important principle that has not lost its relevance even by those days. One must be cautious with the generalization. Just as we, the Jews, rightly reject responsibility for all the deeds of Jewish commissars and for the wild act of those Jews who took part in the Bolshevik Cheka, so the Ukrainian people have the full right to repudiate their own scoundrels who have stained themselves with pogrom crimes. Let there be 200, 300, even 500,000 pogromists, villains among the Ukrainian people. This cannot be extended to the remaining 30 million and more of the native Ukrainian population. And when I will say all Ukrainians are pogromists, we become like those who asserts that all Jews are Bolsheviks. And now we come to the events in France. It's one of the heroes of UNR arm, Jewish, Simon Yakerson, that fought for Ukraine independence. On May 25th, 1926, almost 100 years ago, Simon Petlura was assassinated in Paris by the anarcho-communist Scholem Schwarzbard. The killer was arrested at the scene, and a trial was held in October 1927. The classified documents from the Soviet archives show that Moscow prepared very, very carefully for the upcoming trial. Directives from the Soviet bodies leave no doubt about their intention to make Simon Petlura appear as the main pogromist of the civil war in Russian Empire, to finance the arrival at the trial of useful persons, and to prevent the presence of the inconvenient witnesses, and to obligate the Soviet press to publish only materials recommended by the authorities, Soviet authorities. Following these instructions, the Soviet press enthusiastically lauded Schwarzbard as a glorious avenger for murdered Jews. At the same time, 10 or even 100,000 of people, including Zionist and Jewish religious leaders such as Rabbi Schneerson, were already imprisoned in the USSR concentration camps. Schwarzbard's defense line was essentially copied from the defense used by Maurice Conradi, a captain of the Imperial Russian Army who on May 10, 1923, so about 3 years before, in Lausanne, Switzerland, killed a member of the Soviet delegation, Václav Vorovsky. Conradi's lawyers argued that Vorovsky killing was Conradi's revenge for relatives murdered during the Russian Civil War. An anti-Petlura and pseudo-philo-Semitic campaign instigated through Soviet agents of the influence in France and other Western countries contributed to Schwarzbard's full acquittal, portraying him as supposedly avenging his slain relatives. Having examined the materials of the Paris trial, several conclusions can be drawn. Schwarzbard lied when he claimed he had not shot the severely wounded Petlura while he lay on the ground. This was refuted by several witnesses and by the forensic medical examination. Schwarzbard lied about his date and place of birth in order to hinder the investigation and distance himself from his criminal past. Schwarzbard repeatedly changed his testimony and versions regarding the pogroms under pressure from the prosecution's counter-arguments. Schwarzbard's statements that he planned the assassination of Petlura alone, without any outside help or participation by others, proven to be false. The issue of tragic Proskourev pogrom arose repeatedly during the trial. Initially, Schwarzbard's defense presented a grossly inflated number of victims, several dozen times larger than reality, and claimed Petlura's guilt in preparing and organizing the pogrom. Later, after witness testimony, the defendant and his lawyer argued that if Petlura did not organize the pogrom, then he at least failed to fight the pogromists. Then witnesses confirmed that upon seeing the Ataman Semesenko, Simon Petlura's face changed and he shouted, "What have you done? You have dishonored Ukraine. I will punish you as no one has yet been punished. You ought to have died, but not allowed a pogrom to happen." Recently, I realized in memoirs of famous Pavlo Shandruk, the commander of the division in Galicia, he recalled a very interesting thing. His memoir says, "Several days later, I received orders to move with part of our battalion to the town of Proskourev to stop the pogroms and had engulfed the town and to punish the guilty. The pogrom, not only of Jews, but the entire peaceful population, was started by the Ataman Semesenko. Immediately after we entered the town, the bandits disappeared, and we found only a few specifically dressed Semesenko men, whom we immediately sent under guard to Vinnytsia. Soon I learned that Semesenko, accompanied by several soldiers, had been attacking the commandant's office, terrorizing its staff, and then had started the pogrom itself. Shortly after order was restored, a delegation from the city council arrived at the commandant's office. Among them was a rabbi representing the Jewish population. They sincerely thanked us for restoring calm. Soon we learned that Semesenko had been arrested by order of Commander-in-Chief Petlura and sentenced to execution by military field court. It should be noted that one of the consequences of the arrival in Proskourev was that 8 young Jews, former soldiers of the Tsarist army, enlisted in our battalion. Interesting speech gave the defense attorney Albert Wilm, outlining the causes of the pogroms in Ukraine, and he emphasized, if it's asserted in court that Simon Petlura was a bloody tyrant intent on destroying the Jewish population of Ukraine, then who can explain me why, when the UNR army retreated into Poland, more than 100,000 Jews sought protection from Petlura and opportunity to evacuate together with UNR army units to Poland? Why did these Jews express hope for their return to the independent Ukraine? The state prosecutor on the trial also gave interesting speech. Having carefully studied the materials of the case, I have come to the irrevocable conclusion that Simon Petlura was never an enemy of the Jews. He was never a pogromist or an organizer of pogroms. He was never an anti-Semite. On the contrary, he was a philosemite. I want to note that his first law as head of the state was the law on the autonomy of the national minorities of the country. The role of the murdered tyrant, the role of the punishing hand of the justice does not suit you, defendant. It is simply beyond you. You are a worthless villain, hiding behind another's name, fleeing from place to place, pursued by the police of different states, not for political activity, but for criminal offenses. And that I charge against you. Therefore, your story, in which you wish to appear a noble avenger, does not convince or move me. Friends who knows me know that I always remember my hero, Avraham Shifrin. And this is the case. The information report from the KGB, dated January 10, 1973, stated at the end of 1972 that the Ukrainian-Canadian Congress held anti-Soviet demonstrations in cities across Canada: Toronto, Montreal, Winnipeg, Edmonton, and London. And in document also noted, Avraham Shifrin actively participated in these provocative actions of nationalists. At these events, Shifrin called upon Ukrainian nationalists, Zionists, and the members of other reactionary immigrant organizations to join in the struggle against the USSR. In his speeches, he idolized the figure of Simon Petlura, presenting him as an enemy of anti-Semitism, and condemned the murder of this executioner in Paris, this attempting to remove obstacles to the development of cooperation between Zionists and Ukrainian nationalists. Furthermore, in his letter to Slava Stetsko, dated February 18, 1981, Avraham Shifrin wrote, "Shalom to you, Mrs. Slava. I received your letter with addresses in the Far East. I think it would be good for you to provide us with materials showing that Petlura was a socialist and did not intend pogroms, and that the pogroms were perpetrated by Budyonny and Makhno. It should be explained historically that the Soviet power blames everything on Petlura because he demanded a free Ukraine, as he was a nationalist. They are terrified of nationalism. It needs to be explained wisely, since the Soviet thought that Petlura is a pogromist is firmly established in Israel." In conclusion, I would like to draw your attention to the facts. The campaign of defamation against Simon Petlura, the launch of the disinformation drive about Ukrainian People Republic, and the goals of the Ukrainian struggle for independence 1917-1921 marked the beginning of the Soviet Union systematic and unrelenting attempts to sow discord and set the Ukrainian and Jewish people against one another. The USSR employed a whole range of tools and methods in its campaign against Petlura and the UNR. For example, seizure of archives of the confiscation of the all UNR archives from the Poland and Czechoslovakia after their occupation by USSR in 1945. Propaganda through the art and literature. Extensive use of Soviet writers' work to create an extremely negative image of both Simon Petlura and UNR, as well as of the Ukrainian language and culture in general. The example is Stalin's favorite play, The Days of the Turbines, based on the Mikhail Bulgakov novel, The White Guard. Disinformation, the spreading of rumors that the Petlurist movement was not a national revolutionary movement of the Ukrainian masses and had nothing to do with the Ukrainian revolution. On the contrary, it was allegedly adventurous movement that inevitably degenerated into Atamanshina, borderism, with all its resulting phenomena, pogroms, looting, and violence against civilians. Symbolic erasure and replacement. The deliberate renaming the city of Proskuriev, where the pogrom organized by Ataman Samasenko took place, into city of Khmelnytsky. At the same time, the Order of Khmelnytsky was created and the cult of Khmelnytsky was established as the sole national hero of Ukraine, in opposition, I underline, to the Westerner Ivan Mazepin. Remember Mazepians, Judeo-Mazepians? Contrary to the narrative spread by Soviet propaganda, Simon Petlura was not an anti-Semite. On the contrary, he repeatedly acknowledged and emphasized the contribution of Jews to Ukraine's struggle for state independence. It is tragic that biased opinion instilled by the USSR that Petlura was allegedly an anti-Semite and responsible for all pogroms remains widespread to this certain day, despite well-known facts and the obviously inconsistency in the accusation made by his critics. Numerous facts attest that Petlura was a Philosemite. He was friends with the Jewish leaders, appointed Jews to his government, and both publicly and privately expressed his conviction that the Ukrainian and Jewish people of Ukraine had long become kin, bound together by a shared history, and the Ukrainian statehood was possible only through their firm alliance. Documents and eyewitnesses' testimonies show that Petlura repeatedly tried to prevent pogroms, always took care to help victims when violence could not be averted, and used every means available to stop the pogroms that occurred in territories even partly under his control. It may be argued that he failed in this endeavor. Yes, unfortunately, but only because Ukraine's struggle for liberation as a whole was defeated. Yet it is no coincidence that together with the retreating UNAR army, tens of thousands of Ukrainian Jews left their homes and the country seeking safety and refuge precisely among Petlura and the Petlurists. And I would like to show, this is a picture from the Museum of Petlura in Paris. It's not a coincidence, but the address where it's located in Paris, it's Rue de Palestine. This is the person that I met, and we reviewed it. And this is the book that I, now there in Paris, that I wrote about Petlura, my first book about Ukrainian-Jewish relations. And this is relation now in the front. And I have lots of friends who reading my books in the trenches and spreading the truth, word of truth, because it started from Petlura, continued with Bandera, and Ukraine fighting for independence. But Jews were always near. Thank you.
The If I understood correctly, later on, Yevhen Konovalych, the head of the Organization of Ukrainian Nationalists, also had military training, as did Simon Petlura. So do we know from history if Simon Petlura and Yevhen Konovalych actually knew one another? So with military training, how do they possibly work together?
It's a question for the people who studying Konovalych and another leaders. I believe also Polkovnik Melnik also was involved and also fought for Ukrainian independence. It's hard to say how they communicated, but I know, learning through the archives of the CIA, that it was certain, let's say, problematic relations in between the Petlurists, like on their side, and Ukrainian nationalists. But at the end of the day, they fought for Ukraine, for independence of Ukraine. I don't know if I answer your question. You can.
Is there any evidence that the French government colluded or collaborated with the Soviet, or rather the Russian government, to assassinate Petlura?
I did mention in a lecture, but in a book of Margolin, he specified when pogroms started, and especially in Proskuriu, he communicated with the French authorities who were in Odessa to help Ukrainian People's Republic to fight the pogroms, because the authority and renown of French officers were very high in Ukraine, and they can easily stop it. But French authorities said, it's internal affairs of Ukraine, we will not mess it up. Do it by yourselves. So it was problematic, but I don't think it was financed by French government. Soviet Union, and there is another document in archives that Soviet Union has an enormous, deep and wide net of the agents of influence and agents of the Soviet Union in France and Europe. And in particular, they will, even in the community, it was when assassination happened and before the trial, Ukrainian diaspora built a committee of defense of Petlura. And Soviet agents were in this committee. And they know what they're doing, how they plan to defend Petlura in a trial. Everything was known in Moscow.
Petlura also had quite the cultural background, being the critic of culture and a journalist. Do you have any research that there were cultural connections between the Ukrainians and the Jews, and was Simon Petlura somehow involved in kind of supporting and harboring that relationship when it came to the choir of cautions? Was there anything in regards to that?
You'll remember this Black Hundreds newspaper. And like they saying that jubilee of so-called great poet Shevchenko celebrates only Chokhly and Zhidi in Ukraine, in Kiev. Okay, it's derogatory terms for Jews and Ukrainians, but it's how Russians behave. Yes, I believe it was involvement of Simon Petlura, because I see through the documents that we study that he was paying great attention to the culture and to the spreading word of truth. Especially one of the Ukrainian historians, they spread the knowledge about the Petlura and Koshitz and how they communicated, because Petlura even given Koshitz some notes how to behave and how to give the answers to the press, that Ukraine is an independent country. They have different culture, different language, and different meanings. Like in one interesting movie that we probably watch, like Russian and Ukraine, we're different. The same, no, we're different here and here. So I would say like that.
If you gave this same lecture, let's say today, in Ukraine, and in Israel, and in America, to the Jewish communities there, how do you think, or what do you think would be the general views or reactions to the views that you've expressed tonight here? My sense is, for example, the Jewish community in Ukraine is closer to these views than, for example, the Jewish community in America, and maybe Israel is somewhere in between, but I'd be curious to know how you know these.
I already tried this lecture. It was last year, Lemut Festival, Jewish Cultural Festival, here in Ontario. I gave the lecture, and especially I told about Petlura. But Petlura, it's already the second role of the defense. For people like you said, these anti-Ukrainians, for them it's most important. It's Bandera. Bandera number one. Petlura, it's already not so important, and it's also important that now we publish lots of the documents about the Petlura through the archives. For Bandera, it's also documents, but people, it's need time to adopt this understanding that neither Petlura nor Bandera participated or organized or defend the pogroms and pogromists. For people, it's hard because the Soviet Union, the agitprop, it's agitation and propaganda of the Communist Party. They work very hard and they brainwashed people. They put there, like I said, they replace God with Lenin, so they replace white with black and black with white. It's what they do. Yeah.
And my question is somewhat related with the previous one. So as we know, here in the West, many even well-meaning individuals who support Ukraine today, when they want to learn about Ukrainian history in general and Ukrainian-Jewish relations in particular, they resort to works by historians like John Paul Himka, for example, who often has, unfortunately, a negative view of Ukrainian national heroes. And even though his works were challenged by Ukrainian historians like Volodymyr Vyatrovich or Alexander Zinchenko, so what would you suggest to those people who would like to learn more about Ukrainian history, Ukrainian heroes like Yura Bandera, based on?
The short answer would be to publicize the John Paul Himka dossier from the KGB. It's 1,000 pages. I don't know if you were visiting my previous lecture back in June, where I showed a couple of documents, even photos of the John Paul Himka, because it's a huge dossier. Like I said, it's about 1,000 pages. We have to, but the big question, we have to continue to work. And the only way to fight the myth, like you said, and stereotype and disinformation is given the truth, given the evidence, given the documents. Of course, we don't have documents for everything. Like, for instance, we don't have the documents about Schwarzbart and Volin. But we know through studying the documents that he was, let's say, instrument of the Soviet Union. Another point I didn't mention in a lecture, but it's pretty interesting thing, and I have to brought it. Imagine, October 1936. It's exactly how many? Almost 19 years ago. In Odessa, in Soviet Odessa, coming from nowhere, anarchist, communal anarchist Schwarzbart. And guess what? He was staying person with a very limited amount of money, stayed in the most prestigious hotel in Odessa. And anarchist of Odessa see, oh, it's our hero, let's meet him. I understand you understand what the destiny came after that. But he met with the people and he was hero because he was fighting in Odessa, and I know that Schwarzbart was in Kotovsky regiment in the Civil War, so he fought. That's why I'm saying communal anarchist, because he was and communist and anarchist. By the coincidence, at the same time, in Odessa port came ships with the Spanish gold reserve that has been stolen from the Spain and brought to Soviet Union for the safekeeping. Guess what? It disappeared. The gold disappeared. No? They used for something. So it's strange coincidence, but it's coming. So I brought this. It's very important to fight the disinformation and spread the information about Schwarzbart, but because not many people knows about these facts about Schwarzbart. But if you combine all the facts together and documents and evidence, it could change the world. Like Archimedes said once, we can do the same.
But how is it possible that the Bolsheviks began with that train going to St. Petersburg, and all of a sudden there are agents all over the world?
Despite it was a terrible situation, like economic situation in the First World War, they still have resources. That's why they stole resources and sell it. They got money. And with money, they can buy everybody. I don't know how many agents of the influence or agents by itself we have here in Canada. And inherited. It's lots of stories you heard. Back in October last year, in the parliament, another person. That's why they have money, they have power. Another point is disinformation and influence, like they good, like Petlura said. People who don't see the Bolsheviks, they think that good people. They fought for good, for not being the poor. And so it's good deeds, and they have to help them. That's why lots of agents of the Soviet Union in Great Britain, for example, they worked not for money, but for ideology. Sorry.
There was a reference about archives of Patriarch Iosif Slipy, who I knew personally for 3 years. What was that in reference?
It's archive of Avram Shifrin, the Zionist and, by the way, friend of the Yaroslav Stitsko. So the archive of Shifrin we have here in Toronto, and there is some documents, some papers and letters from the Slipy. Why? Because Slipy were in Gulag and were personally knows Shifrin. They were together in a prison. And after they liberated from the prison, Shifrin came to Rome and met Patriarch Slipy over there. But they worked together, that's why. But it's not the archive of Patriarch. I have a few letters in this archive from Slipy. The only one thing I have to mention, this is the picture of my books that has been burned in Kiev when in summer were bombing of the Kiev. So the publishing and the warehouse with the books has been burned down. This is particularly my book that my publisher sent to me the picture. And what I did, I communicated with him, so I published some books and brought here. So I would like to sell them, raise the money, and send to this amazing person, Volodymyr Shovko-Shipny. He is the publisher, author, and real defender of Ukraine, because in his age he was in territorial defense. And unfortunately, his young son has been fallen in a battle. So I believe it's very important to support, and he said that my book is very important because it was given lots of facts inside and evidences, like Petlura is the part of it, but it's also materials about Stecko, Shukhevich, Bandera, and other people, and of course Metropolite Sheptytsky. So if someone interested, I would like to encourage you to purchase the book, so I will be sending, if you want, I can inscribe. Thank you.
There are several copies.